and I felt better within 3 days. I could not believe it. And my brain just felt more focused, more whole.
Welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks so much for having me. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Read your latest book, and we're going to chat everything anxiety. But first, I want to take things back a little bit, chat in a more general sense, and find out more about your entry point into the health and wellness space. So let's start there.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, so I grew up in Outback, Australia, in Alice Springs, which is a town that's right in the middle of Australia. And at my school, there was half Aboriginal people and half white people. So from a young age, we were taught a lot of Indigenous culture. We were taught Indigenous history. We were taught how the Indigenous people survived a long time before there was ever white people occupying Australia. So from a young age, I was introduced. I remember when I was 5 years old, the Aboriginals taught us that the healthiest way for us to live and to eat was to get food that came straight from the bush or straight from the tree or the earth, the ground, the plant, and just to eat that because that food gave us the most nutrients per bite, but also that this food was spirit filled. So it gave us this energy. It was alive. And then from age 5, I remember this and learning this. And then I watched 2 of my grandfathers pass away from cancer. And one of them had obesity. And I remember looking at him, comparing him to the Aboriginal elderly men and thinking, wow, there's such a difference. And in Aboriginal culture, cancer does not exist. Either does diabetes or obesity. And so I just remember thinking that was the healthiest way. And then my grandfather did the opposite. You know, he did the standard American diet. And so then I carried those teachings with me all throughout high school and university. But I moved away from the Outback to go to Brisbane City to study at university, and that's when I discovered 7-Eleven. And I didn't have my family around to tell me not to eat this kind of food, and I knew it was wrong because the food was so far removed from nature, and I knew that it was not providing me any nutritional value, but it gave me this rush. It was surely my drug of choice. It made me feel amazing for a few minutes before I could crash. And so I found myself always like seeking this high from these foods. And I would tell myself, okay, Monday, I'm going to start fresh and I'm never going to eat gummy bears ever again. And Monday would come and you know how the story goes. A craving came, an impulse came, and it felt so strong I wasn't able to overcome that impulse. And so I ended up being very addicted to processed food and refined sugar for 5 years until I had a major wake-up call. And I had discovered a tumor the size of a golf ball in my lymphatic system in my throat, which at the time I just thought was a swollen gland. No way at 21 years old did I think, oh, I have a tumor. And so I went to the hospital, did a biopsy, was poked and prodded and all of that. And when, once I found out that I was developing early stages of cancer, I thought, okay, now I really have to go back to my roots and start eating clean and nourishing my body, figuring out a way to not be addicted to junk foods anymore and sugars, and really just clean out my system because I knew that I had nutritionally deprived it for so many years. And this is all because of my upbringing. So thankfully I had that upbringing to know that.
So we're going to get to your healing crisis and how things progress from there. But I want to take a little bit of time and talk more about your childhood because it's very interesting. I know it was around age 3 your parents split up and you end up living primarily with your mother at that time. And your mom's a minimalist. Your dad, he's a real nature guy. He's growing his own food, living off the land. Let's talk more about that because I think, the way you grew up really set the stage for the way things evolved once you had your healing crisis.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. My mom, she told us like all we ever need in life is 5 pairs of jeans and some t-shirts, and that could be our wardrobe. So she was just very about being very minimal, very simple. And my mom ate really healthy too, very simple. She grew up just eating fruits and vegetables and meats, like very clean, not a lot of processed food. And I mean, even back then when my mom was growing up, there wasn't a lot of processed food, especially in Australia. And then my father was so natural. I mean, even more natural to me than me, even to this day. I mean, he lived totally off grid. He built his own houses. He made his own bricks. He pumped his own water straight from the ground in Perth in Western Australia. He still lives in Western Australia. No radio, no TV, and was just completely living off the land. And we would go visit him because we grew up with my mom in Alice Springs. We'd go visit him and we'd think, wow, this is like a bit extreme, but now I can appreciate that, and everything that he went through. Basically, it was a full-time job in keeping up that lifestyle of being able to live so off grid and being able to just live from energy, live from the sun and the water, and grow all your own food. And yeah, it's quite amazing now looking back.
And as a kid, I'm sure you didn't have full appreciation of how different and interesting that lifestyle was, both your parents in their own way. What did you think of it at the time? Was it annoying to you or frustrating?
It was so annoying. It was frustrating too, but it was a lesson for, I don't have children, but when I do one day, I think that I would want to raise them in the same way. And I feel like if they got frustrated or annoyed, I'd be like, you know what, too bad, because one day when you're older, you will appreciate it like me. And yeah, but when you're young, you just want to watch TV and eat junk food. But but I'm grateful that they raise us like that.
Well, let's come back to the point of diagnosis. You mentioned everything leading up to that point when you find this lump in your throat, which is obviously at the time very scary, a lot of unknown. You get the biopsy done, and I know you saw 3 different doctors that presented different results to you. So talk about how that all unfolded.
Yeah, that was my first real experience of the medical industry, and the the tumor just popped one day when I was out at a music concert, and I remember I was drinking some vodka and tequila, and I just remember feeling so polluted in my body. My body was so tired. My lymphatic system just really felt like overworked, and it popped, and that's why I thought it was a swollen gland. And for 2 weeks I was really tired, and I just was drinking, garlic juice and ginger, and trying to just boost my immune system. And it was just getting bigger and bigger and harder. So I went to see a naturopath at the time, who I knew she was doing colonics for a lot of my friends. And so she told me, she said, you need to go to the hospital. This looks really serious. And she had cancer in her throat, so she could recognize it. And so I went to the hospital, and they stuck a needle in it to numb the area. Then they put a really big thick needle in it, pulled a piece of it out, and sent it away for a biopsy. And then the results came back, and the initial doctor said, they gave me the printout and said it's 3.7 centimeters, so the size of a golf ball, in my lymphatic system. And they said, right now it's very early stages, and they said, we don't know how it's going to develop, but you can wait and see what's going to happen, or we can do surgery to remove it. So there was no talk of chemo or radiation or anything at that point. It was like, let's see what happens, and if it gets worse, we can go down that route, or you can just cut it out right away. And I was like, well, I don't want to just cut it out, because that's something also that the Aboriginals taught us, is that if you get a tumor or a growth on your body, that if you just go so quickly to surgery and get it cut out, that you're not actually addressing the root cause of why that was there in the first place. So there's a chance that it will come back in that same area, or that it will come back somewhere else. And I knew why I got it. I knew because I had that awareness from my upbringing, that I got it because I had eaten too much junk food, too much poison. I'd put too much poison into my body, and my lymphatic system was like, can't do it anymore. So I knew surgery wasn't an option. And then another doctor I went to, he caused me a little bit of panic, because he said that he looked at all my blood work as well, and he said that it was worse than it was, and he said it was stage 1 cancer. And I went to see another medical doctor, and he was like, well, would you like a vaccine while you're here for cervical cancer? And I was just like, oh, this is so confusing. And he said that I had gotten it from being allergic to a cat, and I've never been allergic to cats, still not this day. So, that's the point where I learned that doctors are well trained, 12 years of medical school, but they don't always know all the answers. And so I think that anyone going through a cancer diagnosis, it's important to get multiple opinions. and before really settling for what to do. And since then I've become a certified nutritionist, which I think you've read. And some of my patients, they've had less of a diagnosis, but they had surgery to take it out because the doctors were like, let's just cut it out. We may as well just cut it out. And, they find me later and they're like, the doctors told me after, oh, we didn't actually need to cut that out. Like, sorry. But, it's just easier at that time just to cut it out because that's the medical industry. So I'm just really grateful that I've had my background and I knew and I had an awareness just to not get anything cut out. And I knew that I really had to go very deep within and figure out how to actually heal it for good. And, I did that. And 12 years later, here I am, healthier and happier than ever before and feeling so free in that. So I'm glad I did that and, able to help others now. But the diagnosis is very scary, obviously. I didn't get a stage 4 diagnosis like some people. That is absolutely terrifying for sure. But in my Cancer Free with Food book, I do talk about, what to do as soon as you get diagnosed. And I interviewed Anita Morjani for the book, and she said the same thing, do not rush into a treatment because chances are it took a long time to develop that cancer. So you don't need to just rush into make a decision that day. And if doctors are trying to get you to make a decision that day, that's usually when the medical, there's a fine line with the medical industry when they're doing their job to make sales. It's a business at the end of the day. So, yeah, it was kind of a long answer for what you just asked, but
No, that's great. Lots of great stuff in there. I'm curious in the end because you had so many mixed opinions on what it was. Did you end up getting a definitive diagnosis or did you just not worry about it and go right to how am I going to change this?
well, I had stage 1, stage 0, and precancerous. So at that point, I just thought, okay, you know what? It looked, I could see on my blood work I had some active cancer cells. So I just took it as, you know what? I have early stages of cancer, and if most of them are precancerous, like it's a ticking time bomb about to explode, okay. But I took it very seriously that if I didn't approach it right away, that it would have developed into something worse and gotten worse. And I didn't want it to spread to other parts of my body, especially with anything in our lymphatic system can spread to under the armpits, and also breast cancer. That's a lot of causes of breast cancer come from the lymphatic system. And so my lymph nodes under my armpits and around my breast were enlarged, and so that was a concern there. The doctor said there was no cancer in those areas. It was all just focused in my throat. So I mean, that's kind of how I settled on it. And I just also knew that I was going to overcome it and that this was my opportunity to really go deep and heal it and actually become healthy. Because, for those 5 years that I was binging on the sugar and the junk food, I was really in a bondage, and I was really in, every day was like a living nightmare, literally. So I thought this is an opportunity to break free of that.
So it's interesting to me because you've referred to this a couple times now where through processed foods and junk food, you're abusing your body for a number of years, for 5 years. And when you got the diagnosis, well, actually, before you got the diagnosis, you ended up going to a naturopathic doctor. So you were still, it must have been maybe related back to your early childhood and living a more natural life. And you also mentioned you had friends that were getting colonics. So it sounds like you were on the border of not doing what you knew you should be doing, but then when things went awry, you went the natural route.
Yeah, exactly. Um, because of my upbringing, my education on it, I knew that the healthy route was the best route to go. And my approach was always, well, after that, it's been like live as natural lifestyle as possible in this modern world. But what I didn't know how to do is how to still eat these foods that I really loved, right? These foods were like a drug, especially not really having them growing up. I didn't know how to enjoy those while still being healthy and still living a natural lifestyle. So I didn't know how you could eat gummy bears and cookie dough and chocolate and still be healthy. It just, back then it was a lot harder. Nowadays it's so much easier because we have all these, recipes. I have so many in my book. And then we also have products that if we want to have chocolate or we want gummy bears or cookie dough, we actually can get it using wholesome ingredients that's also providing our body with nutrition and ultimately nourishment. But back then that didn't really exist. I mean, there was like a couple health food stores in the city I lived in, but to get like a piece of organic chocolate, it was like $20, which is crazy. And it still had white sugar, whereas nowadays we can get chocolate that's sweetened with coconut sugar or honey or maple syrup, which is just so much cleaner, and the lymphatic system doesn't have to fight so hard to get that out of the body. So that's why I'm so passionate about teaching this today, is because I want to help people who are where I was at, which was, okay, I enjoy these foods. I love that feeling of chocolate and gummy bears and cookie dough, and as part of being human, but I don't know how to also be healthy and get nutrition from it at the same time. So that's where the Aboriginals didn't teach me, right? Because they were just so far natural and so far to the earth, same as my father. I used to go there and visit, and he just used to eat the most natural foods, like plain foods. And I was like, how does he do this? Well, cellular memory is part of it for sure. It gets easier and easier and easier, and we don't crave those crazy foods. But that's the part that really tripped me up. And so I didn't know how to, have it all. So that's why I still believed in the natural route, and, still had friends who were juicing and doing colonics. And, I would do a binge day of just eating McDonald's for breakfast and gummy bears for lunch and KFC for dinner. And then the next day I would try and balance it out by only having juice or only eating broccoli. It's just so unhealthy to put the body through that. So I did know that the natural part as well as I was going through that.
All right, well, let's take it to the part of the story where you don't necessarily have an official diagnosis, but you have this lump on your neck and you get the results from these three different doctors. What do you do next? Who do you turn to, educate yourself and decide what the next step is going to be?
I went to the naturopath, and she wanted to help me, thank God. And she, I think she felt a bit sorry for me that I was young, and she thought, I had a lot of good energy, and she saw herself in me a little bit, and she'd gone through something similar. And she also knew that about lymphatic system and my gut also. We haven't even talked about that, but, my blood work also showed I was on the verge of leukemia. I went and got a live blood test done, and I saw parasites riddled, like taking over. I had so many parasites in my blood. And so she knew, she's like, this is a gut issue. She said, if we clean out your gut, it's going to drain out the tumor. It's going to drain out your lymphatic system. So she knew what to do, and she was so confident about it. And so I was so bloated. My digestive system was barely working because of how I treated it for 5 years. And so she said, okay, we're gonna do a colonic every day. So we did a colonic every day, and then the coffee enema the next day. So we alternated, and this went on for over 2 months. Just focusing on cleaning out my gut. I was drinking bentonite clay as well. She suggested to do that after she saw the parasites in my blood. And I just took all my results and things to her. And so, she really helped me to focus on detoxing out my body, detoxing out my gut. And we did try the raw food approach for about 2 days. And how that was so popular back then, and a little bit still now, but people kind of get that it's not for everyone. So I did raw foods for 2 days and tried fasting, and I just was so tired, and the tumor was getting bigger and harder, and I felt so weak, and I was just like, there's no way I feel like I can overcome this, feeling how drained I felt. So she saw that in me really quickly, and she's like, okay, you need to have cooked foods, you need to have some protein. And so we adapted that. And then also I drank 6 juices a day, vegetable juices. So alternate between beet juice and green juice. So I made a juice every single day, and was just drinking those. And I just remember thinking, okay, nutrition in, toxins out, nutrition in, cancer out, and just replacing those cells with these juices and really good foods.
So when the raw food diet didn't work out for you, Did you pivot to a specific diet at that time, or was it just eating real foods, eating, as close to nature as possible? Or would there have been a title for the way you ate?
It was just eating real foods at that time. This was before I created the Earth Diet. So the Earth Diet, which I founded after I had healed, is basically how I was eating. But we didn't have a name for it at that time, so it was just like, okay, just eat real foods. I just knew I needed to eat nutrition. And I also knew a lot about juicing at that time. So I knew that the fastest way for me to get nutrition into my cells was to do it through juicing. Because there's no fiber, penetrates straight into the cells, it gives the cells straight nutrients. And I also went and saw an alternative doctor there who was giving IV shots at the time. And, he was like, you should get some vitamin C IV. And I could not afford it. And the price was crazy. I was like, there's no way. So I was like, okay, well, the next best thing is juicing. So that was, it was just juicing and just eating real foods. And at this time, I still didn't know what to do when a craving came up for chocolate or fried foods or sugar. I just thought, okay, I just thought, hopefully the craving doesn't come up. I just need to be really, really healthy. And I was hoping that the tumor was enough to scare that addiction out of me, or scare that craving out of my body, which it wasn't, because that was the next thing that I really had to work on and overcome.
We'll talk more about that in the early days when those cravings would come up, and knowing you had this tumor wasn't enough.
Yeah. I was hoping the tumor was enough, and I thought, like, how is this not enough of a wake-up call? And it was crazy. And it's crazy, and I can relate to people with addiction, obviously, and that's why I specialize in it now, is that addiction really feels so much stronger than anything else in our life. Even anything good that we might have going, even though we know it might break up a relationship or ruin a career, the addiction is so strong, and it's cellular memory. It's like literally, it's chemical as well as emotional and mental. And so, sure enough, not long after I was there doing all this detox, I started to crave sugar. And so I went on a sneaky trip down to the gas station and bought some lollies, some candy, and some chocolate, and ate it. And I just thought, like, lucky I'm doing all this detox every day to get it out of my body, because I just, I ate so much of it. And then that caused a lot of internal pain, obviously a lot of conflict. And so that forced me to really surrender and go within and ask those hard questions of like, what do I do when I'm craving this food that's so toxic? And eventually, after so much pain of that and so much suffering of that question and that feeling, eventually the answer came. Eventually. And that's why now I believe, seek and we do find. It might take a year, it might take 10 years, but I do really believe that if we keep seeking that, eventually we will be liberated from that. We will get that answer. Call it universe, call it God, whatever you want, but I really feel like it was a gift from God. And I just kept knocking at the door, like, what do I do? Surely this is not how I have to live life, for the rest of my life, like controlled by this impulse to junk food. And the idea that I had was, okay, every time you have a craving, go and think, how can I eat this in the most natural way possible? The natural way is the key. How can I eat this in the most natural way possible? And I can either make it or I can go and buy it. This was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And so then every time I had a craving after that, I just thought, okay, well, how can I eat chicken nuggets? Okay, I can go home and make it. And instead of the crust having gluten, gluten, white flour is one of the suspects in creating so many health issues. I use almond flour, and I put some turmeric in there and some sea salt. Delicious, crunchy, oh my gosh, amazing. And then chocolate, I would get some almond flour, some cacao powder, and then at the time I was using agave. Now I've upgraded to honey or maple syrup, or even just dates, and just squishing them in there. And I would make chocolate balls, and then put almond butter in there. And the next key piece to this was eating as much as I needed until I felt like that craving wasn't there anymore. So this is, and now, about 5 years ago, I found out this is actually called replacement therapy. And this is what therapists use, and also nutritionists. I use this in my practice now that I know what it's called. Replacement therapy is, if you're craving chocolate, eat as much of this good chocolate, healthy chocolate as you want, because you're getting magnesium, antioxidants, you're getting so many nutrients from this real chocolate. If it's got almond flour, it's got some protein. Eat as much of that as you need until you don't crave the poisonous chocolate or the toxic chocolate. And so in the beginning, I was eating 20 little chocolate truffles a day. 20 a day. But that's what stopped me from craving the toxic chocolate, and it started to give my cells new memory and new data. And so all of a sudden I would look at that chocolate that I used to just, I couldn't be in the same room before with this toxic chocolate. I would see it and be like, oh my gosh, okay, don't have it, try not to look at it, and then I would end up having it. Whereas I would look at it and be like, that desire to have it was gone, completely dead. And for anyone that feels like they're really in bondage of food addiction or impulsive eating or overeating, stress eating, this is the most liberating feeling ever. And so that was, that was to come after I had detoxed the body and the tumor had completely dissolved, which took 3 months. I was still craving the junk foods. So it came after that. It came in October, which was when I had that epiphany of like, okay, because I was like, I don't want this tumor to come back. And I really thought I was going to use this tumor to help completely transform my life. But it really was this epiphany that I had that is what changed everything. And that's when I created the Earth Diet and started the blog, and eventually it went viral because it turned out a lot of other people were dealing with the same thing secretly.
It's a simple strategy, but it makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, was there any foods, toxic ones from your past that you weren't able to come up with a healthy alternative for?
None. I mean, everything. That's why I say now to people online or my patients or clients, I'm like, tell me what you're craving and I'll tell you, how to make it. Gummy bears were the hardest in the beginning, but nowadays now is the easiest time to be healthy. We have everything. We have the ingredients, we have the technology to make everything that we want to eat, but so much healthier.
I want to talk about the emotional aspect. You talked about going in before, and I'm just curious, as somebody who hasn't had a diagnosis of that caliber, and again, you didn't know exactly what the diagnosis was at the time. You knew it was bad though. What was going on in your head at that time, and what did you do to work through that?
Yeah, it was emotionally it was very hard. I just remember thinking like, this sucks. I'm 21 years old and here I am, inside. Because the 3 months I was healing, I didn't work. And I had friends, help me out financially, but I just felt like a failure. And I think that's like one of the worst feelings a human being can feel is, okay, I've failed. I failed at my life, and I'm not, living my dream job, or not even pursuing anything. So yeah, I just felt like a failure, and because I was still at the time having those cravings for junk foods, I felt very scared because I knew that's what got me into this position. And I thought that if I didn't have a solution for it, that I was just going to end up back here. So I just felt like I was caught in this vicious cycle and that I was going to continue suffering. And yeah, I mean, definitely not a fun place to be emotionally. Hit some new bottoms that I had never hit before that. But I also because I had this strength that I had so many friends around me, and the naturopath, they were just so confident. They were like, you're young, you're going to beat this, keep juicing, you're going to detox your body. And I also had a thought that if I cause this, that I could uncause it and then I could fix it. So I was feeling very empowered in that way.
I'm glad you brought up the part of the story where you weren't able to work for a few months because I can imagine as you're telling your story, my head went there. It's like, what were you doing for work at the time, and how did you continue to work and make money and support yourself as you're going through such a challenging time? And luckily, in your case, you had support from friends you mentioned, and because the healing journey was, in the big scheme of things, relatively short, only a few months, you're able to endure. But what would you say to somebody who gets a diagnosis like that? And this is another layer onto, a health complication. How do they go about working through that when, they have a job and they have family and they have all these different areas in their life that they're juggling already? How do they prioritize themselves?
Well, I mean, at some point you have to, and it depends how severe it is. I knew that I had a short time to do it because it was, it was the size of a golf ball, and that's no joke. And I really thought that the different diagnoses that I had, early stages of cancer, I thought, okay, I have a chance here to not let it get worse. And I thought if I leave it, it would get worse. But also, I was so fatigued, I couldn't do anything anyway. So that's when I thought, I'm just going to focus as long as this takes to really heal. And I did think it would take at least 3 months. I did have some savings, thank God. So that helped, and then the help of my friends as well. And every time I go back to Australia, I'm always like trying to buy them things and still make up for them helping me. But people today, that's really hard because financial stress is so stressful. So I've seen a lot of people do GoFundMe's these days, which is great because you can share your story and you can have all your family friends to donate, which helps. And then you can ask people to share it as well online. Send it to me, I'll share it, I'm happy to do that. And I also gift sessions, one-on-one sessions, to people going through cancer who have a GoFundMe, and I say, well, this is my contribution, is I'll give you a session, give you a nutrition guide to focus on. So there's a lot of people out there who want to help if you give them the opportunity, but you do have to put yourself out there and ask for help. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's hard because these things can be expensive. So, health insurance covers the conventional things, but then the alternative things, that's like where it gets a little bit more tricky to be able to cover. But, I do believe that the universe provides, or God provides. So to keep that in mind.
So to try and put the pieces together of this miraculous healing journey over the course of a few months, you tried the raw food diet, pivoted into a real food diet, you're getting daily colonics, you're able to take time to slow down and not work. What other key pieces were there that enabled you to heal so quickly?
Yeah, I was sleeping for sometimes 18 hours a day, so I was asleep for more than I was awake, and I really needed to just rest. My body was so fatigued, and um, so that was a key part of it. Sometimes I would go for a walk in nature. Before that, I would do some really intense workouts and put my body through a lot of strain. And a lot of people with lymphatic issues actually do work out the gym really hardcore and lift a lot of iron. And sometimes that's just not the best thing for the body. So I really had to learn how to relax and not work out and just go for walks in nature, really gentle exercise. I also did reflexology as well. So did some foot detox and had a few massages from a few people who came and gifted them to me, so that was really nice. And then yeah, I mean, it was mostly sleeping and colonics, and which was detoxing my body, and drinking the juice that was just restoring all that nutrition back into my body that I deprived of it.
Got it. Talk more about the origin of the blog. Did this take place like after you had been all clear and you were, had a checkup with the doctor and the tumor had gone away? Or was it towards the end of that? Just want to put the timeline there together.
Yeah, so the tumor went away in April, and then I was still craving junk foods from April until October. October is when this came. October was the last time when I was saying before how I was just in so much pain. And Eckhart Tolle says that, when you come to the end of your road, you come to the end of yourself, or you come to the end of your suffering, where you're just like, I literally cannot suffer with this same thing again. It's too much. So it was October, and that's when I really surrendered, and I was just, cried out to God, like, God, what, like, what do I do with this craving? Like, surely there has to be another way. And that's when I got that epiphany, that answer, that download, whatever you want to call it, of, okay, here's what to do for every time you have a craving. Think, okay, how can I eat this in the most natural way possible? And then the idea was to do that for 365 days, call it the Earth Diet. So this is an opportunity to go back to the earth. And I was so excited. And I remember I thought, okay, so I'll start it tomorrow. And so I thought, I was so excited. I was like, yes, this feels like the right thing to do. This feels like the answer. But I thought, okay, this is my last day to go out and just eat junk food. I'm going to have one more taste of it, see what it's like. So I went out and I bought so much junk food, like a Cadbury block of chocolate, Tim Tams, gummy bears. I had McDonald's. I brought it all home, and I remember just having bites of it, and it already tasted dead to me. And I was just like, I cannot wait to start tomorrow, to start replacing everything I'm craving and start eating real food, or eating food like this, but made healthy. And so I remember I didn't even eat it all. And that's when I knew that there was a change that had taken place. And then the next day is the day that I started it and called it the Earth Diet, put it on blogspot.com. I did it for 365 days, and I didn't cheat, and I ate everything completely natural from the earth. And it was hard back then, 12 years ago, because there wasn't all the choices that we have today. We can go to Whole Foods and we can get anything we want. It's so much easier. So I really had to revolve my whole lifestyle around it, and got into the kitchen, started making all these recipes, and started to go to the health food stores. And I barely had any money sometimes, but I would just spend it all on a jar of almond butter or something healthy. And the blog ended up going viral that within that 12 months. And a lot of people were writing in, women saying that they were secretly binge eating as well on junk food, and they couldn't stop it, and they wished that they could, but they got like the same high, and then they couldn't resist the temptation or the cravings. And so they started making recipes also. And it was my blog readers who gave me the idea to put everything together as a book when it was done.
And while you went through that 12 months writing the blog, what were you doing for work at the time? And was there a pivot during that 12 months when you're able to, start working in the online health and wellness space and pivot out of the old work?
At the time I hadn't thought I would do it, full time forever. I was working, selling and taking people out on nightclub tours on the Gold Coast. So that was a really fun job. It was paying great. So I was doing that. And then also I went to university for film and television production. So I was doing a few jobs here and there in the film and television space as well, which, paid pretty decently per day in Australia. So I was doing that. And then it was like towards the end of the blog, after the year, I thought, wow, I would love to do this as my job, as my career. This is my highest passion, more than film and television. And so that's when I thought, wow, yeah, okay, publishing a book is a great idea. I should do that. And that's when I thought, okay, yeah, how can I make this into a career? And I just knew at that point that I wanted to help people, overcome what I did for the rest of my life. I was like, yep, I'm in. And 12 years in, and I'm still just as passionate about it as I was then.
And where along the timeline did you pick up and move to the US?
I moved to the US in, it was probably just after the 12 months of the blog. So in 2010. Actually no. So I started in October, the blog, and I moved in March. So that's right. I remember the blog was, half of it was in Australia and the other half was in America. And I remember coming to America and being like, wow, there are so many more healthy alternatives here. And I just knew it was so much easier to be healthy in America. And so
And what was it that brought you to the US? Had you been before? And was this to help get that new career in the health and wellness space, off the ground?
Exactly. Yeah. So I had always thought America was amazing because where I grew up in Alice Springs, actually, there's a NASA space base there. Not a lot of people know that. So there are Aboriginals who live there, white people who live there, but there's also a little pocket of Americans who live in Alice Springs, and they work out at the NASA space base. And so I, also grew up with seeing American culture in Alice Springs. It was so bizarre. And I just remember thinking like, wow, Americans are cool. They have snow, they have candy. So I thought I would really love to go there one day. I never thought I would, want to end up living there. But as soon as I started the blog, most of my readers were coming from America. So I thought, wow, okay, and I knew at the time America was in this health epidemic and health crisis, and I knew that there was a revolution going on with juicing and, the raw food diet and everything like that. So I thought this is probably the place for me to go, is to go to America. And I ended up getting a job on a film so in Alabama, so I took that and that was my ticket into America originally. And then I ended up getting my book published, so I switched visas to the A10 visa, creative visa, and had to get my residency, and then eventually I just became a citizen this year in March.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
And I know part of your cancer story is actually down the line after you had cancer and healed. Your mother ended up having cancer. She had severe breast cancer in both breasts. Where along the timeline was that? And how were you able to help her through that time?
Yeah, so that was I was 22 when I moved to America, and then that was when I was 23 years old. So yeah, so my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 advanced breast cancer in both breasts. And so yeah, and just devastating. My heart goes out to anyone whose parent gets a diagnosis, especially young people. Whenever I meet a young person in their 20s who's they just found out their mum got breast cancer, I definitely spend some time chatting with them because it's so scary. But I just remember calling her up and saying, okay, what do you want to do? And this is the same thing that I do now with patients and clients. Okay, so you just got diagnosed with cancer. What do you want to do? And mum said, well, I would feel more confident if I had surgery and just had everything taken out, like, had everything removed. And then she said, I don't want to do chemo and radiation, which the doctors were recommending for her to do surgery and then chemo and radiation, like all of it, which is what they do for stage 4, obviously. And she said, I just feel like I can't do that intuitively. I feel like I won't survive it. I feel like it's too much. I don't want to lose my hair. And she said, if I do the surgery and then I'll change my diet and do what you did. And that's what she felt really confident in doing. That was her kind of own treatment plan that she talked about, with with me, and she felt really confident. So that's what she went ahead and did. And she's cancer free to this day. And I'm really proud of her for that, because the doctors and they called her for a good 6 months after that and said, like, you have to get chemo, you have to do radiation, or the cancer's going to come back. And she just intuitively knew, she's like, I just cannot do it. And that was her decision. And so really respect that she stuck to that. And, it's not the same for everyone. Some people get really confused and they're not really sure what to do. But she just really knew, like, chemo radiation's not for me. And it worked out for her. And then she started juicing. The day she got her diagnosis was the day she had her very first juice. And she used to put a lot of garlic in the juice. She couldn't afford vitamin C IVs either, so she just took a lot of vitamin C supplements, and she quit smoking cigarettes, and she started knitting, so doing some things to really help her relax, and juicing was a really big part of it for her as well.
I'm so happy to hear she's doing so well and continues to. That's amazing. And one thing we didn't talk about when it came to your cancer journey was supplementation. You mentioned the vitamin C before. You said you couldn't afford the vitamin C IV, but were there a lot of capsules and different things that naturopath had you take at the time?
No, actually, it's not something she really prescribed, and I didn't know a lot about supplements then, and also certainly, didn't have the money for it. So the only thing I was doing really was, juicing, and I thought that's like taking 1,000 supplements. And then I was drinking bentonite clay every day as well. So that, in that's supplement in some form. So now I believe in supplementation because I've done so much more research, and it's just so easy now for people just to take the supplements and drop them in. Some people like supplements don't work, and it's like they actually do work. They can't not work because you're actually taking food that's condensed and you're putting it into your body. You're dropping it straight in, so it requires very little effort, and it can boost someone's confidence as well without them having to do so much work to get the supplements in.
Well, a big thing with supplements is along the lines of the same thing when it comes to food, and that is quality. There's such a spectrum and so many different supplements out there these days. And if you're not getting quality, then I could see how, likely you're not going to get a result from that.
Yeah, for sure. It's just like food. We need to make sure our supplements are high quality. And I just came out with my very first product last year. Finally, I've always wanted to do that. And it was a supplement. And I always thought it would be a food, but it was a supplement and just made sense for me to do that. And so I learned a lot about the process of supplements and the FDA and sourcing ingredients, and how it's not very regulated, and a lot of people don't really care about the ingredients that are going into supplements. So that was definitely an interesting process, and me seeking out the highest quality ingredients to put in my supplements was really eye-opening. And yeah, so it's whenever I'm working with online or with my clients or patients, I'm teaching them to read the ingredient labels with everything, food and supplements. And once you know how to read the ingredient labels, you know how to pick out a higher quality supplement over another one.
So when it came to your cancer journey, just to be clear, you didn't have any conventional treatment.
I had no conventional treatment, correct? No surgery, no chemo, no radiation. All
Got it.
natural.
And we'll use the supplement you just brought up to pivot into your anxiety journey. So this is further down the timeline. Your mother heals, and I think it was at age 26, you go see a psychiatrist and get diagnosed with severe anxiety and depression. So let's talk about what was going through your mind at the time and how you're feeling.
Yeah, so this was after, I got signed with Hay House, great publisher. That was a dream come true, and like all the things in my career were really working themselves out, and I thought this is amazing. But then inside I just felt so empty, and you know I am a big believer in looking at people's family histories and how that can affect us. And in my family history, it's cancer and it's depression. So, I'd overcome the cancer part of it. And I really felt like living the earth diet lifestyle, living as close to nature as possible, was going to prevent that from ever happening to me again. But the depression thing definitely hit me sideways. I did not expect to experience that, especially because I never experienced depression before. Even when I was going through healing the tumor, I was not depressed. I was sad, I was down, but that's not depression. Depression is every day and just never seeing a way out of it. And then just all of a sudden the past is just like there, and it just feels like the past is never going to go away. So, you know, that was, yeah, the first time I'd really just started to feel bad like every single day. And I thought, why? Because everything in my career is working out, and from the outside everyone thought it, I was so happy. And that's because I'm nice to people just naturally, and so people just thought, okay, you must be like living a great life. But inside I just felt so sad and empty. And like I mentioned, depression runs in my family. So some close family members were going through it, and going through a really like hard suicidal phase. And so that put me into this depression phase. And so there was a lot of healing to do with that, with the emotional, mental, spiritual part, because that's what I thought depression was. I thought that it was more emotional, mental, spiritual. So I started to do all these things to heal that, and it really helped a lot. But then after many years of that, I was still feeling some anxiety and a little bit of depression. And that's when I thought, maybe there is a chemical imbalance here. Maybe something's up with that. And so that's what made me want to go to see a medical doctor and ask for a blood test. And she did all my blood, and she did also my omega-3 panels, which does cost extra. Unfortunately, insurance doesn't cover that, but I was deficient in omega-3 fatty acids. And that's fascinating, because if we are deficient in that, we will be experiencing anxiety and depression. To what degree, we don't know, but that's one of the causes of depression and anxiety. And I thought, wow, like, is it that simple? Okay, so she's like, start taking fish oil supplements. And at the time, with the earth diet, I've been mostly plant-based. Some people do the earth diet more paleo. They eat a lot of animal protein. They eat a lot of that. But I've always been mostly on the very plant-based kind of vegan side of things. Not 100% vegan ever. I don't believe in that. But I, didn't eat that much animal protein or fish or anything like that. And so she's like, take a fish oil supplement every day, which I was always resistant to. But I was like, you know what? If that's going to make me feel better than having anxiety, sure. So I started taking that, and then started focusing on eating more avocado, walnuts, chia seed, hemp seed, wild salmon, wild tuna. And I felt better within 3 days. I could not believe it. And my brain just felt more focused, more whole, and I didn't feel so jittery. I didn't feel like my energy was scattered or all over the place or anxious. I felt more calm, and I felt like, you know what, I can finally feel like anything that's coming my way, I feel like I can overcome that in a more grounded, healthy, confident way with having these sufficient omegas. And so when that happened, I was like, okay, the next subject I'm going to focus on and research about is anxiety and food. And anxiety and depression go hand in hand. So that's how my Anxiety Free with Food book came about, and my anxiety supplement, which is why I take my own supplement every single day. And it has a vegan omegas in it. I still take the fish oil, and I take my supplement as well. And yeah, it's incredible. It's such a different feeling.
Such a simple and quick fix. That's incredible. And when you're working with people, how often do you find the cause of depression and anxiety is something so, you know, plug and play and straightforward?
Well, the very first thing I do is ask them to get blood work and say, well, let's find out if you have any deficiencies, because if you do, we can easily fix that. We can straight away get more foods into you and get those supplements into you, and people feel better within that same week. It's incredible. And some people do have depression, anxiety that come from traumas, or come from the past, or come from emotional, mental, and spiritual. But either way, the body, if it's strengthened with these nutrients, feels so much better. The brain chemistry is better. Eating these neuroprotective things makes a night and day difference with depression, anxiety. So that's always the first place that I start with my patients, is say, okay, well, let's just see everything that's going on and do these tests. And then, sure enough, they're deficient in B vitamins or omegas, or a combination of both. We'll look at the amino profile. We look at magnesium as well. Magnesium deficiencies also cause anxiety and depression. And that's why I'm so passionate about this subject, because I tell people, you're out there running around thinking you're crazy because you have depression, anxiety. Well, no, maybe you're just deficient in nutrients, and that's the reason. And people feel so much better when they find out it's a deficiency, and they feel like they can actually have some control and restore those nutrients into the body and change it.
So it sounds like testing is the big thing. When somebody's suffering, get tested, see where your deficiencies are, address them to start.
Yes, exactly. That's the first place that I'd like to start with people, is deficiencies. It's very empowering. And then, if someone doesn't have a deficiency, although I've never come across that actually, I've never come across someone yet who's been suffering with anxiety, depression, who doesn't have some kind of deficiency. And then, of course, if certain types of depression, anxiety, I'll refer them to a psychiatrist or a therapist as well, to work with them and work with me on the food part of it, just to make sure that, you're doing all that you can to really to heal it and overcome it.
And when you see these deficiencies, you mentioned you ended up taking a fish oil supplement. How often can they be addressed by diet only versus including supplements, or do you just throw both of them at the person to try and get them better as quickly as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give them all their options and I'll say, okay, we want to get your diet back to nature as much as possible. Everyone needs to be eating this way, basically. Everyone needs to be eating real food and staying away from processed foods as much as possible. And then I'll also talk about supplements and say, what's realistic. So I meet people where they're at. I'm like, how realistic is this for you? And some people say, you know what, I'm ready to change 100% everything. I'm going to get rid of everything in my kitchen, get all new stuff. Other people are like, I need to take this slow over the next 12 months or the next 2 years. I set sometimes 4-year goals with people. Like 4 years is very realistic. So after 4 years, someone will be completely transformed and have entirely new cellular memory. So they're operating completely differently, different thoughts, different emotions, different cravings. They're enjoying eating healthy foods. So it just depends where each person is at. But people who are very overwhelmed with depression, anxiety, I've often found supplements are the first place to start because it's the easiest place to start because you can just simply, drop them in and you don't have to go in the kitchen and make this big grand meal or juice. It's very easy. And so supplements is the first place. The next place I'll start is, okay, how can we get you drinking a green drink every single day? Whether it's a fresh green juice, which is a commitment to make for sure, or you can go to the juice bar and buy a green juice, or just buying some liquid chlorophyll for $15 and dropping that into water every day. That can be a green drink to start with, or a greens powder. So that's always my agenda. That's always my angle is like, okay, how can we get you doing this whole lifestyle? But let's start with this segue of supplements and the green drink every day.
I like that. Starting slow because learning and applying this big lifestyle shift for people that, this is totally new to can be overwhelming in and of itself, let alone if you're suffering from anxiety, depression, and maybe your energy is low and you're not feeling so great. It would be nice to be able to apply those supplements and maybe a juice to start feeling a little bit better, see things working, and then get more into, taking on one thing at a time.
Yeah, for sure. It gets the momentum going. And once people get momentum and they start to feel better, then they become hooked and they're like, oh, this is amazing. It's like a natural high. It really is. It's a natural drug. It's incredible. It's the best feeling because there's no side effects. It's amazing.
Earlier, you talked about magnesium and supplementing with that. I'm curious, what type of magnesium supplement do you recommend? Because there's so many different types out there these days.
Yeah. Well, for a lower dose, my supplements have magnesium within the 10 ingredients that are in there, especially from the spirulina, the chlorella. And other than that, I would say, I get my magnesium from chocolate. Chocolate's so high in magnesium. Chocolate is such a great functional food. It's incredible as long as you're eating the right type of chocolate, especially for women. It just helps us to de-bloat and it makes us feel happy as soon as we smell it. If you're a chocolate person, not everyone's a chocolate person. But the other magnesium supplements I'd recommend are from Ancient Nutrition, from Josh Axe and Jordan Rubin. So they have some magnesium supplements as well. And I'm not exactly sure where they source it from, but those are an example of a supplement brand that I trust. They're all really high quality, non-GMO supplements. So, magnesium can come from nuts, it can come from cacao powder. Yeah, it can come from greens. Dark leafy greens are really high in magnesium, which is why I put spirulina and chlorella into my supplement as well to get magnesium from those.
So, sticking with this theme of keeping things easy, especially in the beginning for people, somebody who is suffering from depression and or anxiety right now, you mentioned chocolate, dark leafy greens. What's a handful of other foods that they can introduce to help, get that inertia, that momentum going and start feeling better?
Yeah, I actually wrote a top 10 list in my Anxiety Free with Food book. And I did all my research. I wanted to find out what are the top 10 foods on earth that have been proven to help with anxiety and depression and just help the brain and help the nervous system. And what I found is number one is dark leafy greens, which we just talked about. And not a lot of people like eating them. I get that. I didn't either. When I was going through my junk food phase, I thought eating greens or eating a salad was such a waste of time. So I get that. That's why having a green drink is so helpful. Or, my supplements are green actually, but you don't taste the greens. So that's super helpful. The second one is turmeric. Turmeric is excellent for anxiety, depression. It's anti-inflammatory. And then berries are really great as well. So berries are so uplifting. Blueberries, raspberries, blackberries. They're so high in antioxidants and they truly are nature's candy. And then also all the good healthy fats. So avocado, wild salmon or other wild fish like wild tuna is really, really good for anxiety, depression. And flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts. And walnuts are so great because they look like actual little brains. And it's really interesting because the doctrine of signatures, which was developed by white men. But before that, the indigenous people, when they used to want to heal or strengthen an organ, they would look to nature to find an imprint because they believed that the universe, the sun, and the earth all created together to create imprints of foods to help certain organs. So they would believe that walnuts are to eat for the brain, to keep the brain going, to keep the brain healthy. And now we have science that says, yes, actually, they are really good for the brain. So walnuts are another really good one. And then chocolate, as we talked about.
What I like about your recommendations is that they're easy to find these things. It's not some obscure superfood that, you got to go to a special store and spend top dollar to get. You can get all or most of these things just at your regular grocery store.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how it should be. It should be simple. And I'll think a lot of this theme of this podcast is finding out these things. They are really simple, but it sometimes can take us like a long time to figure that out and to apply it. But it can be really simple and it can also be very affordable. And the motto is, just make it work. Make it work, especially in the beginning, just go buy some walnuts. If you can't buy organic for now, go and just buy conventional walnuts. Because I do believe eating conventional real food is better than not eating real food at all. And then if you can, buy some organic walnuts every now and then as well.
Start where you are. I like that.
Yeah.
So let's go to the other end of the spectrum. We talked about a number of foods there that can be helpful if you're suffering with your mental health. What might be some of the foods that somebody might be taking in on a regular basis, thinking they're healthy foods, and it might be contributing to anxiety and or depression?
Great question. So in the book, I have a list of the most toxic, most neurotoxic foods on earth, foods, if we can even call them that are anxiogenic, which means that they actually are anxiety producing. So some foods do cause anxiety. That's been proven by science and researchers. So in the book, I have that list. And then I also have the controversial list, which is a list of where if some people eat them, they might be okay for their body type, but they might actually cause anxiety for others. So on this list is dairy. So dairy is one people think that they're drinking dairy or eating dairy, that they're actually being healthy, whereas this is not necessarily the case. And dairy, there's a study in here that they did at Brown University. 67% of people who are consuming dairy have lactose intolerance and don't even realize it. They don't even realize it. So they're having all these symptoms, gut issues or sensitivities, or they're irritable, having, mood swings. And it could be coming from the dairy, but not even realizing it. So dairy is, I like to call it a culprit in causing so many health issues, especially anxiety, depression. So that's always one to do an experiment with and cut out and see if you do notice a difference. Cut it out for 7 days and see how you feel, see if you feel better. And people are like, well, I need dairy for my bones and for calcium. Well, you don't really. You can eat dark leafy greens and get more calcium from dark leafy greens than from dairy. So don't worry about not getting calcium from dairy. So that's one of them. Another one is gluten, so whole grains. And yes, whole grains is natural, it comes straight from the earth, but it's changed so much in the last 50, 60 years. So gluten comes from wheat or rye or barley. And back then, the ancestors in America, they ate a lot of gluten, a lot of wheat, because that filled them up. And that was the only thing that could really fill them up back then, and it kept them going for a while. But nowadays we don't need food to fill us up. It's the opposite, right? We have too many foods, we have too many options. So gluten is another one that does cause inflammation. Even people with the strongest, healthiest guts, if they eat gluten, it still takes energy on the digestive system to break it down, and it's still inflammatory. So it's something also worth looking at, cutting out. When I was sick, I didn't have any gluten at all. And now that I'm healthy and maintaining health, I'll have gluten maybe once or twice a month. And that's a good balance for me. And my body's able to tolerate that. Anymore, it's kind of like, oh, that was a little bit too much. You can feel it in your digestive system or lymphatic system. So you want to find that nice balance for you, but maybe do a cleanse or a detox and then look at just treating gluten like a special occasion.
You make a really important point there. I want to highlight that maybe different foods are going to work better for you at different points during your healing journey. You talked about how gluten was removed when you're going through your healing, but now you can introduce it, sporadically. So just because something is quote unquote bad doesn't mean it's bad for everybody or bad for everybody at, a specific time.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like if I was, really weak and not able to metabolize or digest foods, then I wouldn't eat those culprits, which are gluten and dairy or even alcohol. When we're sick, when we're really sick with the cold or something, we don't want to drink alcohol because we're like, oh, we're feeling so sick. And so our body knows not to have those things during that time because it does take a lot of energy from the body to digest those things.
And what about caffeine? Is this something you consume on a regular basis or do you find it affects your mental health negatively?
So caffeine is the one that was on the controversial list. And I found that fascinating because there were some studies that said that coffee is great for anxiety, depression, and some studies said it can trigger anxiety, depression. So it's on the controversial list. So it's bio-individual. So for some people, coffee is great and it can relieve stress and can create health. For others, no, it can trigger anxiety and depression. Personally, I've just never had a taste for coffee. I do have some caffeine in green tea and chocolate. That's where I get my caffeine, and I'll just have a little bit of that each day. I do consume cacao powder every single day.
Right. And in the last number of years, there's been a lot of hype over CBD oil in the health and wellness space. I'm curious when it comes to, anxiety, depression, mental health challenges, is that something you found for yourself or working with clients that can be helpful?
That is another one on the controversial list. So again, bio-individual, CBD and the cannabis plant can be so healing for so many people, but then on the other spectrum, it can actually cause anxiety for some. So again, when I'm working with clients and patients, we find that, okay, does CBD work for you or not? Does caffeine work for you or not? Gluten, dairy. So CBD is one of them. I've seen people completely transform and heal and get rid of their pain with CBD, and then others are like, I can't do it, it gives me anxiety. So it's really bio-individual, and that's what, food really is medicine, but different foods is different medicine for different people, and this is where we have to respect each person's bio-individuality.
When you shared your journey there healing from anxiety and depression, you talked about how it was a relatively quick fix, introducing the omega 3s, and within a few days you felt better. Were there any other big needle movers along that journey, like later on down the road that you found, played a big part in making your mental health even better?
Only the spiritual side of things, not the food side of things. The food side, it was really just me getting those omegas, making sure I had enough of them. I probably was very mind blown when I was doing research on the anxiety book. I found studies that showed that vegans and vegetarians suffer more with mental health issues than people who eat meat. But people who eat too much meat also suffered with mental health issues. So it's finding this in between balance of eating just the right amount of animal protein. And I know this will upset a lot of vegans, but I really just do not believe in veganism. I believe in keeping factory farming out. I think that's so toxic for sure. But if we look at all of our ancestors, the indigenous tribes from all around the world, they all consumed some kind of animal protein. Even Asians, Asians were mostly vegan, but they did have fish. People in Alaska, I try to tell them to be vegan, they'll be like, what? They would die. Most of their fuel came from fish and from animal fats. And so I believe in finding that balance of being mostly plant-based and eating predominantly vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds, and good healthy fats and oils, but having some animal protein here or there. So I was just very fascinated with the research on that, and just how vegans really need to be vigilant. And I get it, some vegans just don't want to eat meat at all. I get it. So you just have to be vigilant in making sure you're taking supplements to make sure that you're not deficient, and doing blood tests every 12 months if things are going good. If you don't feel right, you got to do blood tests every 6 months just to make sure that you're not deficient, because vegans just have to work a little bit harder. So I found that really interesting. And then the other thing was, now I've just maintained this diet. So I still doing the earth diet, but now eating more animal, a little bit more of animal, and taking more of these supplements as well. And ashwagandha as well is another big one, which is I put a daily dose of ashwagandha in my anxiety-free supplement, and ashwagandha was a game changer for me. I just felt so much more stabilized, and felt my immune system was stronger, felt my gut was a lot stronger. And so that's been a game changer for sure as well in the food part.
And when it comes to that research about vegans suffering more from mental health conditions, do we know, was there any conclusions on why that is? Does it all come down to the omega 3s and not getting enough, good healthy fats?
Yeah, that and the B vitamins. So they're lacking the aminos. Yeah, because you can't get that from vegan sources, and that's why a lot of vegans will take B vitamins. So I would say to every vegan out there, you just want to make sure you're doing an omega-3 supplement, and that you can get a vegan omega-3 supplement. You don't have to get a fish oil one, and a B vitamin. Garden of Life have an amazing B vitamin as well. So just make sure you're taking those. And that's why, because if the brain is deficient in those, it's not working properly, and the nervous system feels like it's on edge all the time.
All right. Well, we've went really deep, shared a lot of your story. I really appreciate you coming on and getting into such great detail. Other than the listeners getting a copy of one of your books, how can they connect with you after the show?
They can connect on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. So just look up my name, Liana Werner-Gray, or the Earth Diet. I have an account for the Earth Diet as well. And I post something new every day, new content, a new health tip or a new recipe. So would love to connect with you guys.
All right. Thank you for your time. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Jesse. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.